In the last topic, we looked at our spending on health aid internationally. Now let's look in a little more detail about what we do with that money. The U.S. government has a number of different agencies and organizations that deal with global health issues. This next chart shows you a complex structure that involves the U.S.'s International Aid Agency, USAID, the Agency for International Development, the State Department, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and then a number of other federal organizations that work in the global health scene. And these different organizations receive money allocated through our legislative process by the U.S. Congress for programs that are identified as global health programs. Recently, we've tried to unify, conceptually at least, those programs under the notion of global health initiatives. But they still remain administered and managed by a complex array of organizations within the U.S. government. We can look in this chart at some of the ways in which our funding is distributed amongst these agencies. And you can see that actually 3 of these agencies account for large shares of the funding. USAID at a little under a third, the State Department at about 60%, and the National Institutes of Health at about 6%. The Centers for Disease Control also appears in this chart as the light blue section at the very top with a smaller share. But actually some of this money that passes originally through these agencies actually passes from one agency to another before it's finally used on global health concerns outside the United States. For example, the 60% or so that appears under the State Department in this chart, much of it goes to fund the United States HIV/AIDS programs overseas, and much of this money also flows through the other agencies like USAID, NIH, and the CDC. So it's actually not so easy to know where the money flows within the government until it reaches the outside uses in the rest of the world. In this next chart, we can see a breakdown of how the money that the United States spends on global health, the money we spend on health aid outside our country, is allocated across different kinds of health priorities. The lower part of this chart, the blue part, represents HIV/AIDS spending, and it is overwhelmingly the largest share of our development assistance for health from the United States. You can see that other diseases also play a significant role, including malaria, tuberculosis, and maternal and newborn and child health and nutrition. So we distribute our funds across different kinds of health needs and through a variety of channels. This map represents some of the countries that are recipients of U.S. health aid. And you can see first that there are quite a number of them, and also that they tend to be concentrated in a few regions of the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and to some degree in Central and Eastern Europe, although we do have significant aid programs in other parts of the world, in the Caribbean, some Latin American countries, and in South and Southeast Asia. 3 of our largest global health priority programs are the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, commonly known as PEPFAR, the President's Malaria Initiative, or PMI. Both of these programs were started under U.S. President George Bush. And finally, a new program that was only launched a year ago, A Promise Renewed, which focuses on recommitting ourselves to achieving child survival goals, and in particular, very dramatic improvements in child survival, reducing under 5 child mortality by 2035. There are many other programs that the U.S. supports in global health, but these 3 are well known and tend to be very large foci for U.S. assistance overseas. Let's take a look at each of these one at a time. PEPFAR, in the year 2014, funded almost $7 billion of work in 65 different countries, Much of this money went to support treatment for 6.7 million people who are receiving antiretroviral drugs to help them stay alive after serious HIV infection. Almost 60 million people received some kind of testing and counseling from PEPFAR-financed programs. 1.5 million pregnant women received interventions to help them avoid transmitting their HIV/AIDS infections to their newborn babies. The President's Malaria Initiative, launched in 2005, seeks to reduce malaria by half in 19 African nations. It's a key part of the Global Health Initiative that President Obama announced in 2009, which hopes to reduce malaria even by 70% in sub-Saharan Africa, and preventing infections amongst 450 million people. There's a particular focus on decline in mortality amongst children under 5, and in a number of countries, Malawi, Rwanda, and others, really substantial achievements have been recorded in reducing child mortality from malaria. Much of this due to some of the creative new interventions using insecticide-treated bed nets and distributing these widely to populations. A Promise Renewed, the newest initiative, focuses on child survival. And in the most recent year, about 6.5 million children died before their 5th birthday. This is a terrible tragedy and a terrible health burden on the world, but it is a great improvement over the picture just 10 or 15 years ago, when double that number of children were dying each year before their 5th birthday. A Promise Renewed seeks to provide new energy behind child health and nutrition programs, particularly addressing problems of pneumonia, diarrhea, child malaria, and malnutrition, the major killers.